Well, good afternoon. I'm in the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 10. And I was studying this, and Paul's reminding some of the Corinthians of their history. And we find this in chapter 10. I underlined some things in my Bible that I hope to be able to bring up, and hopefully it will turn into some kind of a message. I don't really know yet. It says in verse 1 of 1 Corinthians 10, "Moreover, brethren," see, he's talking to the Corinthian brothers, "I would not that ye should be ignorant." Now, Paul is saying these things so they won't have an excuse. Sometimes I think we look for an excuse to be ignorant, unlearned. "I would not have you to be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the clouds." Now, it's talking about when Israel had left Egypt and was heading toward the sea, that he's saying here that all our fathers. Now you notice he didn't say some, he said all. That all our fathers were under the cloud, talking about the cloud of the protection of God. It could have been from the cloud of the protection. It says, "And all passed through the sea." All of the fathers that passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Meaning, here's what that means. When they walked across the water or the ground on dry land, the water was above their head. And in a sense, what Paul was saying here is, "And were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea," meaning when they was going down through the sand, going down into the riverbed to cross over to the other side, the water was basically above their head. And then in verse 3 it says this, "And did all eat the same spiritual meat." I'm talking about all the fathers now, not just some. And we know what the spiritual meat was. We know that God supplied the manna. The manna came and fed the people as they was going in the desert, that God had to feed them. And he allowed manna to fall. And then in verse 4 it says, "And did all the fathers now, drink the same drink." And then it says, "For they drank of the spiritual rock that followed them." The spiritual rock. Well, we know that the spiritual rock was Christ, because it says right there, "And that spiritual rock was Christ." You notice that word rock is capitalized. It's a picture of Jesus. Even back in that day, it was a picture of Jesus. But notice verse 5 of how it somewhat changes a little bit. "But with many of them You notice it didn't say the word all. But with many of them, God was not well pleased. He didn't say all. There was some that God was pleased with, but there was some. With many, it was more than some, it was many. Many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Remember, I think the ground actually swallowed some of them. I believe I'm right on that. Some of them had died in the wilderness. That's what it says right here. In verse number 6, now these things were our examples. Talking about the Corinthians now. That's who Paul's talking to. Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Some of these ones that God wasn't pleased with had situations that they was overthrown in the wilderness, and so therefore God was not well pleased. And then he goes and says, now these things were our examples. So he's getting these Corinthians to think of the history that he just said. And now he's getting them to sort of remember these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they. It's assuming that it's talking about with the many that fell or that was overthrown in the wilderness. Many lusted. It says that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Talking about the many. Not all. There was some that was faithful to God, but many was not. And then he goes on to say in verse 7, neither be idolaters. Well, you notice that word idolaters start out with the word idol. Anytime we make anything of God an idol, it automatically goes against the grain of God. Automatically. So, Paul says here in verse 7, neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them. It's talking about the ones that were overthrown in the wilderness. This was the some of them that the Bible is referring to. And then Paul brings this up. As it is written, now we know what that means. It's referring to the Old Testament. As it is written, this is my message right here, the next part. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Remember, there's a place, and I don't remember where it is, and it's just coming back to my mind right now. Remember where the Bible talks about eat, drinking, and being merry. There's a lot of people that are eating and drinking and being merry. Now, this verse here didn't mention the word merry, but it did mention that they rose up to play. And you know, I have a feeling that that's where the church world is today for the most part. All of them, verse 1, and all, in verse number 2, did all, in verse number 3, did all, in verse number 4, they drank of the spiritual rock that followed them, but with many of them God was not well pleased. Now, there's going to be a lot of people, no doubt, that the day will come that they will stand before God and they will answer for the playtime that they had. When I was little, I don't remember a lot about my elementary days. That's been a long time ago. I don't really remember things that I did when it was playtime and you would go outside and play on the monkey bars and run around like a wild, mad dog. I don't remember a lot of that. But I'm sure that growing up as a child, we eat and drank at lunchtime, and we rose up to play. Not every bit of the day in our elementary years did we have to study. I guess they knew that children needed to have exercise and they needed to move around. And no doubt there's people that sat down to eat. They're eating. Now, what they're eating, I really don't know. That's part of the problem, is a lot of people that are preaching in churches are not preaching what thus saith the Lord. They're preaching what a lot of people, what they want to hear. That's not good enough. He says here, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink. A lot of churches, their focus is on eating and drinking. Now, I'm not talking about drinking alcohol. I'm talking about people love the fellowship by eating and drinking. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing damnable about having a day that everybody brings food to eat. But, it's amazing how that on them particular events, you get people that shows up that hadn't been there in 6 months. And they're coming and showing up just for the food. They're coming just to be able to sit down and eat the food for free. The people sat down to eat. The question you have to ask yourself is, what is it that you're eating? When I looked at chapter 10, when I walked in here, I didn't know I was going to turn to chapter 10. The only verse that I remember is verse number 4. But I felt like, I can't talk about verse number 4 if I don't mention verse number 1 and verse number 2 and verse number 3. And if I could mention them 3 verses and then the 4th verse that I was familiar with, I also had to mention verse 5 and verse 6 and verse number 7. So see, I don't want to get in trouble by just picking out a verse like verse number 7, neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them. See, not all were idolaters. There were some that the Lord had favor in. There's some that the Lord has favor in. And the reason I'm even out here reading these verses is hopefully the Lord is finding favor in what you're hearing today. That would be my desire, is that you would hear what I'm trying to say. And it's talking about the people sat down to eat and drink. Now, was Paul getting on to them? No, I think what Paul was doing is he was reminding them as it is written. And I'd be willing to bet you somewhere in the Old Testament, you will find where Paul was referencing, it could have been Jeremiah, it could have been Isaiah, it could have been anybody in the Old Testament. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and to drink. So somewhere in the Old Testament, you will find something to that effect. Paul was using the Word of God to make the statement that eating and drinking and then rising up to play. And I think that that's where a lot of people is in the attitude of the Lord, is eat, drink, and play. It's not that important to win the lost. Many people wouldn't witness if the Lord himself come down here and demanded that people witness. I'm glad that the Lord didn't put a command to get into heaven by how many people you witness to, because I can tell you right now, there's going to be a lot of empty people on that day, because too many people is interested in eating and drinking and rising up to play. And a person's soul is not that important. I've often said it like this, and I'll say it again to you all today. If you was to go into a grocery store and say that there's 50 people in that grocery store and they're all walking in different aisles, and you got people that are scattered all through that store. If you had the access to be able to spot people, take a person that is lost. The lost person is wearing a sheet that is colored black. A lot like my background back here. I can change my background. Y'all seen me change my background before. But if people that were lost was walking around in black sheets, and the same people that would be in the store, only a very, very few would be in white sheets. How heartbreaking it is to know that there's many people that are walking around in darkness. They're walking around in darkness. They have no clue that they're living in darkness. Nobody has ever told them that they need to get saved. They might not have ever heard the gospel before. They might think it's a big fat joke. But think of the people that would be in a store of 50 people. How many people would be dressed in a black sheet? And how many people would be wearing a white sheet? Many people is going to be stuck into the blackness of this life because the Christian refuses to witness. And to me, what I get out of this, where it says and they sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. There's too much playing going on. There's just entirely too much playing going on. And it would be my desire to do what I can. That's the reason when I come out here, y'all don't hear me cutting the fool. You don't hear me joking around. You don't hear me get off on this subject and run a rabbit over there. I listen to some at times that I wonder, what in the world are they saying? They're on this subject 1 second. They're on the other subject the next second. And it's almost like following a tennis ball. And the ball was being hit back and two. And it's like keeping your head moving of where are they going in this direction and that direction. I have always tried to study and meditate and look for things that I believe that the Lord would give me to say. And right here in this verse, in the end of verse 7, the people that sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And I have a feeling there's a lot of people that are in darkness, that they're rising up to play, and they have no idea that they're standing in darkness. Now, you know what? We might can live our life another 5 years if God tarries and he doesn't come and get the people that know him and trust him. You got to remember, notice that all was their fathers, and all passed through the sea, all were baptized, and did all eat the same spiritual drink, and did all drink the same spiritual drink. But many of them, God was not well pleased. How many people do you think is going to be like this in front of God on that day? And God's going to have to say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." Don't be caught as eating and drinking and rising up to play. My advice is to take this serious. Your life depends on it. What the Lord wants you to do is to get salvation. Salvation is your ticket to go to heaven. And without that ticket, you won't go. And I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of people that's not going to take a message like this very serious. Because I'm a church member. Well, I was too for a long time. But church membership don't get you to heaven. Being good don't get you to heaven. Being honest don't get you to heaven. You notice the Bible said that people sat down to eat, drink, and rose up to play. My advice is not do that. Elderly ministry is how you're able to get a hold of me. If you want to talk, by all means, look me up. There's a phone number on that web page that you can get to. Look me up. I'd be glad to talk with you. I don't have all the answers, but I have the answer. The answer is Jesus. He don't want you to be content in just eating and drinking and rising up to play. This world is like a microwave that the timer's counting down to 0. And what happens to the microwave when it hits 0? It has a little bell that lets you know that your food is ready. Elderly Ministry is the website. You can contact me there. You can also get me on YouTube. This is YouTube right here. You can also contact me on YouTube if you decide you want to talk, I'll be glad to talk with you. I hope this makes sense to you today. Take it serious. Take your eternity serious. God does. God sent his son to die. He sent his son to die so that we could go to heaven and be with him. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to it. I hope you are. You might want to decide if you're eating and drinking and rising up to play. Playtime is over. When the elementary teacher said, "Okay, children, let's come back to class. Playtime is over." Playtime's just about over. Thank y'all for watching.